The night Elinor Voss walked out of Asheford Manor in the pouring rain, she made herself one promise: she would never beg. Not for shelter. Not for warmth. Not for him. She kept that promise for 4 years. He spent every one of those years wishing she hadn't. Elinor Voss arrived at Ashford Manor on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a single leather case and a letter of recommendation written in her father's careful, hopeful handwriting. She was not a guest. She was never going to be a guest. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford, Margaret Pemberton, had hired her through a London agency to organize the estate's winter charity ball. The kind of grand, exhausting event that required someone meticulous, invisible, and most importantly, inexpensive. Elinor was all three. She had organized 4 such events in the past 2 years, each one more polished than the last, and she had learned something valuable about houses like Ashford along the way. The grander the entrance hall, the colder the people inside it. Ashford's entrance hall was very grand indeed. She was shown to a small room on the 2nd floor, not quite the servants' quarters, not quite a guest room. Somewhere in between, which told her everything she needed to know about how the Dowager Duchess saw her. She unpacked her case neatly, hung her 2 good dresses behind the door, and set her notebooks on the writing desk. Then she went to work. For the first 10 days, she barely lifted her eyes from her lists. There were flowers to source and menus to approve and seating arrangements to negotiate with a housekeeper who believed Elinor had no business making decisions about anything. There were letters to write, vendors to confirm, and a ballroom that needed its chandeliers cleaned before the Dowager Duchess would so much as glance at it. Elinor did all of it without complaint, without fuss, and without once asking for anything she hadn't already been promised in her contract. She did not notice the Duke of Ashford until he noticed her first. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days after her arrival. Elinor was standing in the library. She had slipped in quietly to consult a county map for a question about the flower supplier's route, when the door opened behind her and a man walked in as though the room belonged to him. Which she realized a moment later, it did. William Ashford was taller than she expected a duke to be, though she later understood that was a foolish thought. Dukes were simply men, after all, built in the same ordinary way as everyone else. He had dark hair that needed cutting, and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he had been traveling, and hadn't yet decided whether he was glad to be home. He was holding a book he clearly intended to return to the shelf, and he stopped when he saw her standing at the map table, one finger pressed to a road she had been tracing. He did not look annoyed. That surprised her. "I didn't know anyone was in here," he said. "I apologize, Your Grace." "I'll only be another moment." She kept her voice level. Professional. She had learned that the best way to be invisible in houses like this was to be efficient. To take up as little time and space as possible, to answer only what was asked, to give people no reason to remember you were there. He crossed the room and slid his book back onto the shelf. He did not leave. "You're the one organizing the ball," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Grace." "Mrs. Hartley says you've already changed the seating plan 3 times. "Mrs. Hartley is correct." Elinor allowed herself a small, careful pause. "The 3rd arrangement is significantly better than the 1st. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. "I don't doubt it," he said. He left after that, and Elinor turned back to her map and told herself firmly that the brief exchange meant nothing at all. She was wrong, of course, but she didn't know that yet. Over the following 2 weeks, she saw him often. Not because he sought her out, at least, that was what she told herself. He simply moved through the house in the way that people do when it is entirely their own, unhurried and unannounced, and Alina moved through it in the way that working guests do, purposefully and quietly. Their paths crossed in corridors, in the morning room, twice on the east terrace, when Alina went out early to check on the delivery of the outdoor lanterns. Each time he spoke to her. Not at length. Not in any way that could be called improper. But he asked questions, real questions, not polite noise about the ball, about her work, about where she had organized events before. He listened to her answers. He remembered what she said. A week after their first meeting, he mentioned something she had told him about a ball in Wiltshire, casually, in passing, as though he had filed it away and kept it. No one in houses like Asheford filed away things that Alina said. She began to be careful. She recognized the particular danger of feeling seen by someone who had no business seeing her. She kept her answers shorter. She found reasons to be in different rooms. She reminded herself, firmly and often, that she was here for 6 more weeks, that she had a small rented room in London waiting for her, that her father needed the money this work would bring, and that William Ashford was a duke who would be married before the year was out to someone whose name appeared in the society pages. She was sensible. She was practical. She was 23 years old, and she had never once in her life allowed herself the luxury of foolishness. And then one evening she was in the library again. She had taken to working there after dinner because it was warm and quiet, and no one disturbed her, and William Ashford walked in and sat down in the chair across from her writing desk without being invited and said, "Tell me something true." Alina looked up from her notebook. "I beg your pardon." "Everyone in this house talks constantly," he said, "and no one says anything real. I've been home for 3 weeks. I'm already exhausted by it." He leaned back in the chair with the ease of a man who had clearly never had to wonder whether he was welcome anywhere. "You don't seem like someone who wastes words. So tell me something true." Alina looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Your chandelier in the east wing has 3 broken crystals that your housekeeper hasn't noticed. If the Dowager Duchess sees them before the ball, she will blame me. I would appreciate it if you said nothing." He stared at her. Then he laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and Alina felt something shift in her chest that she immediately, firmly, pushed back down. "That's not the kind of true I meant," he said. "It's the only kind I have available at present, Your Grace." He looked at her for a long moment, still half smiling. "William," he said quietly. She said nothing. "My name," he said. "When there's no one else in the room." Alina looked back down at her notebook. She did not say his name that evening. But she thought about it on the way to her room, which was already more than she should have allowed. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford saw everything. This was something Alina should have understood sooner. Margaret Pemberton had spent 40 years managing a house, a title, and a son she considered her greatest achievement and her most demanding project, and she had not done so by missing things. She noticed the way William lingered in rooms where Alina happened to be working. She noticed the library, light burning later than it should. She noticed the particular quality of silence that fell over her son at dinner, when Alina's name came up in passing conversation. She waited. She was patient in the way that powerful women learn to be patient, not because they are unsure, but because they prefer to act at exactly the right moment. That moment came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before the ball. Alina was summoned to the Dowager Duchess's private sitting room at 8:30. She went without alarm. There were still decisions to be made about the event, and the Dowager Duchess often preferred to discuss them in the evenings. She brought her notebook. She sat in the chair she was directed to. She folded her hands and waited. The Dowager Duchess did not look at her notebook. "You are a vicar's daughter," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace." "From a village in Shropshire with no family connections of any significance." "That is correct." The Dowager Duchess set down her teacup with a small, precise click. "Then I will be direct with you, Miss Voss, because I think you are an intelligent young woman, and I have no interest in wasting either of our time." She looked at Alina with eyes that were not unkind but were entirely without warmth. "My son is to be engaged to Lady Cesile Hargrove before Christmas. The arrangement has been in place for 2 years. The families are agreed. The only thing that remains is the formal announcement, which will be made at this ball." Alina said nothing. "He is fond of you," the Dowager Duchess continued. "I suspect you may be fond of him. I am not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, or by pretending that I don't understand why." She paused. "But fondness, Miss Voss, is not a foundation. It is a distraction. And you are a sensible girl, which means you already know this." Alina's hands were very still in her lap. "What William needs," the Dowager Duchess said, "is a wife who can stand beside him in every room in England without anyone raising an eyebrow. What he does not need," she held Alina's gaze without flinching, "is a vicar's daughter from Shropshire who organizes other people's parties for a living." The room was very quiet. "He asked me to send you away himself," the Dowager Duchess added. The words landed lightly, carefully, like something placed rather than thrown. He didn't want the conversation to happen in person. He thought it would be kinder. Alina looked at her hands. She thought about the library. She thought about "Tell me something true." She thought about the way he had said his name, quietly, as though it were something being offered. Then she thought about the word kinder, and what it meant, and what it didn't. "I see," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Your wages for the full 6 weeks will be paid regardless. I will ensure your reference is excellent." The Dowager Duchess nodded once, as though something had been agreed. "I trust you can be ready to leave in the morning." Alina stood. She smoothed her skirt. She picked up her notebook. "I'll leave tonight," she said. She packed in 20 minutes. She had arrived with one leather case, and she left with the same one, which made things simpler. She did not say goodbye to Mrs. Hartley or to any of the maids who had been cautiously kind to her. She put on her coat, picked up her case, and walked down the main staircase because there was no reason, she decided, to use the servants' entrance. Not tonight. The rain had been building all evening. By the time she stepped through the front door of Asheford Manor, it was falling in heavy, cold sheets, the kind that soaked through a coat in under a minute. The gravel drive stretched ahead of her, pale and glistening in the dark, leading down to the road that would take her to the village, and then eventually to the coaching inn, and then eventually back to London. 3 miles to the village. She had measured it on the map herself, 11 days ago, for reasons that had nothing to do with this. She did not let herself look back at the house. This was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than she had expected, which surprised her, because she had believed she was being careful. She had believed she had kept herself safely behind glass, watching something she had no right to want, and that the glass would protect her when the moment came. It turned out the glass had not been as thick as she thought. She walked. The rain soaked through her coat, and then through the dress beneath it. Her boots, which were good boots but not made for this, began to let the water in somewhere around the first mile. She did not slow down. She did not stop. She made herself count her steps for a while, and then she stopped counting and simply walked, one foot in front of the other, through the dark and the rain, away from Asheford Manor and everything in it. She did not look back. In the library on the second floor of Asheford Manor, a lamp was still burning. William Ashford stood at the window and watched the pale shape of Eleanor Voss move down the drive in the rain, until the dark swallowed her completely. He stood there for a long time after that, one hand pressed flat against the cold glass, looking at the empty road. He had not known his mother was going to do it tonight. He had not known his mother was going to do it at all. Not like this, not so quickly, not with that particular cruelty disguised as efficiency. He had known about Lady Cesile. He had known, in the abstract, distant way that heirs to dukedoms know about their obligations, that his life was already arranged in ways he had not arranged himself. He had accepted this with the kind of quiet resignation that passed for maturity in houses like Ashford. But he had not known, until he stood at this window and watched Eleanor Voss walk away in the rain, how much he had been hoping for something else. He should go after her. The thought was immediate and clear and useless. He knew even as it formed that he wouldn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because what would he offer her if he did? His name. His house. He didn't have the right to offer those things to someone like Eleanor, not with Cecile's name already written into agreements he hadn't signed, but hadn't refused either. And Eleanor, who had looked at him as though she was always slightly surprised to find that he was worth looking at, Eleanor, deserved better than a man who watched from windows. He stayed there until the rain eased. He stayed there until the drive was empty and dark, and there was nothing left to look at. Then he turned away from the window and walked out of the library, and did not sleep at all that night. Eleanor arrived in London on a Friday morning with wet boots, a ruined coat, and exactly 4 shillings and threepence in her purse. She had spent the night at the coaching inn in the village. A small, damp room that smelled of tallow candles and other people's misfortune, and she had lain awake in the dark staring at the ceiling and allowing herself, just that once, just for those few hours, to feel the full weight of what had happened. She was methodical about it, the way she was methodical about everything. She let herself feel it. She named it clearly, without softening the edges. She had been foolish. She had allowed something to grow in a place where nothing should have been planted. And now she was leaving on a night coach in wet boots with 4 shillings and threepence, and a letter of recommendation from a woman who had just destroyed her with perfect politeness. By the time the coach reached London, she was done with it. She did not think about William Ashford again for 11 days. This was not easy. But Eleanor had learned, growing up in a cold vicarage with a gentle father and very little money, that feelings were not the enemy self-pity was. Feelings passed through you if you let them. Self-pity built rooms and moved furniture in and stayed. She found lodgings in Clerkenwell, 2 small rooms above a printer's shop, noisy and cramped and cheaper than anything else she could find at short notice. She unpacked her leather case for the second time in a month. She hung her 2 good dresses behind the door. She sat at the small table by the window and opened a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, in her father's careful handwriting that she had inherited along with his stubbornness. What comes next? What came next was Mrs. Dorothea Fenn. Eleanor found her through a notice in a draper's shop window. A widow of comfortable means seeking a capable young woman for light household management and occasional correspondence. The pay was modest but reliable, which was what Alina needed, and Mrs. Fenn turned out to be one of those rare people who said exactly what they meant and meant exactly what they said, which Alina found deeply restoring after Asheford. She worked for Mrs. Fenn for 8 months. In that time she managed the household accounts, organized 2 small dinner parties, accompanied Mrs. Fenn to various charitable committees, and in the evenings at the table in her 2 rooms above the printer's shop, she sewed. Alina had always been good with her hands. Her mother had taught her. A quiet, precise woman who had died when Alina was 12 and left behind very little except a small collection of French fashion plates, and a daughter who could construct a sleeve with her eyes half closed. Alina had never thought of it as anything more than a useful skill. A thing to do with her hands in the evenings. A way to make her 2 good dresses last longer than they should. But that first winter in London, with the printer's press thumping beneath her floor and Mrs. Fenn's small salary not quite reaching the end of each month, Alina looked at her needle and thread and her mother's fashion plates and the bolt of good wool she had bought cheaply from a remnant seller in Cheapside, and she made a decision. She would not organize other people's celebrations anymore. She would build something of her own. It began very small. A dress for Mrs. Fenn's niece, a pretty girl getting married on a budget, who cried when she tried it on and told everyone she knew. Then 2 dresses for neighbors of Mrs. Fenn. Then an alteration for a woman in the next street, who had heard from the neighbor of the neighbor. Alina took every commission carefully, promised nothing she couldn't deliver, and delivered more than she promised every single time. By the end of the first year, she had outgrown the 2 rooms above the printer's shop. She moved to a small ground-floor space in a better street in Marylebone. Not a fashionable address, not yet, but respectable enough that a certain kind of woman would walk through the door without feeling she was doing something improper. She hired one seamstress, a small, fierce woman named Dottie who worked faster than anyone Alina had ever seen, and had opinions about hemlines that were usually correct. She painted the sign above the door herself, E. Voss. Dressmaker. Simple. Clean. No flourishes. Mrs. Fenn came to the opening and brought 3 friends and cried a little, which embarrassed Alina and touched her more than she showed. The second year was harder than the first. There were months when the commission slowed and Alina sat at her work table in the evenings doing sums that didn't quite add up, trying to decide which bill to pay first and which supplier could wait another week. There were competitors, established houses in better streets with wealthier clients, who dismissed her as a novelty, a clever little shop that would fold by summer. There were clients who were difficult and clients who were late with payment, and one memorable client who returned a finished gown claiming the color was wrong, which it was not, and demanded Alina redo it at no charge, which Alina declined with such precise and quiet firmness that the woman left and then, inexplicably, sent her daughter the following month. Alina learned things in that second year that no one teaches you directly. She learned that reputation is built in the moments when you are most tempted to cut corners. She learned that the right 3 clients were worth more than 20 unreliable ones. She learned that being underestimated was not a disadvantage if you were paying attention. She did not think about Asheford Manor. She had become, by this point, quite skilled at not thinking about it. The third year things changed. It began with the Countess of Mere, a tall, angular woman of 50 who had been dressed by the same London house for 15 years and arrived at Alina's door one November afternoon looking, as she later told her friends, for something different. Alina spent 2 hours with her. She asked questions and listened to the answers, and looked at the Countess with the particular attention she gave to everything. Not flattering, not deferential, simply accurate. And then she made 3 suggestions that the Countess had not expected and could not find fault with. The gown she produced 6 weeks later was the most talked-about thing at the Harrington Winter Ball. By January, Alina had 2 more clients of similar standing. By March she had 4. By summer, she had hired 2 more seamstresses and moved to a larger space on the same street, and repainted the sign with a steadier hand and slightly better paint. She did not celebrate any of this particularly. She noted it, filed it, and moved on to the next thing that needed doing. This was simply how she had always worked, forward and forward and forward again, with no time wasted looking back. If she sometimes stood at her workroom window in the evenings, watching the street below with the particular stillness of someone whose thoughts have gone somewhere else, Dottie noticed but never said a word. Dottie was wise in that way. By the 4th year, the 3 most fashionable duchesses in London were clients of Voss. Alina had not sought them out. She did not seek clients out. She had learned early that the moment you pursued that kind of woman, she retreated. What she had done was produce, consistently and without fanfare, work that was better than anything else available at the price, and occasionally better than things available at twice the price. And the right people had noticed in the way that the right people always eventually notice things. Her days were full and structured and purposeful. She arrived at the workroom before anyone else and left after everyone had gone. She had a better apartment now. Proper rooms, 2 floors up, light in the mornings. And she had bought herself a new coat and 2 new dresses and sent money to her father in Shropshire every month without fail. She was, by any reasonable measure, doing well. She was also, though she would not have used this word herself, lonely. Not desperately. Not in a way that stopped her working or sleeping or finding genuine satisfaction in the things she built. But there was a particular kind of quiet that settled in the evenings, in the space between finishing work and the moment sleep finally came, that she had not entirely found a way to fill. She did not examine this too closely. Examining things too closely had costs, and she had already paid more than her share. The bell above the workroom door rang on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 4 years and 5 months after Alina had walked 3 miles in the rain. Alina was at her cutting table and did not look up immediately. Dottie went to greet whoever it was. A moment later Dottie appeared in the doorway with an expression Alina had never seen on her before. A careful, deliberately neutral expression that meant something significant was happening, and Dottie had decided it was not her place to say so. "A customer, Miss Voss," she said. "Lady Asheford. Says she has an appointment." Alina's scissors stopped. She had no appointment with any Lady Asheford. She would have remembered. She remembered every appointment. She set the scissors down. She straightened her spine, the way she always did, quietly, without drama, the small private preparation for whatever came next. Then she walked out to the front room. The young woman standing there was perhaps 20, fair-haired and pretty in an unguarded way, wearing a very good coat and the slightly nervous expression of someone who is not sure they have done the right thing but has done it anyway. Alina recognized her immediately, though they had never been formally introduced. Caroline Asheford, William's younger sister. She had been 15 and away at school during the weeks Alina spent at Asheford Manor. She looked nothing like him, except around the eyes. Alina smiled a professional smile, warm and perfectly measured. "Lady Caroline," she said. "How can I help you?" Caroline Asheford blinked. "You know who I am." I organized your family's winter ball 4 years ago, Elena said pleasantly. I have a good memory for faces. Please come and sit down. Tell me about the occasion. The occasion, it turned out, was Caroline's own engagement, a spring wedding, a large one, everything to be perfect. She wanted a gown that was modern without being startling, and her mother. Elena noted the careful way Caroline did not quite finish that sentence. Her mother had strong opinions, which Caroline was gently trying to work around. Elena asked her questions. She listened. She made notes in her notebook with the same steady hand she used for everything. She gave Caroline her full and genuine attention, because Caroline was a client and deserved it, and because focusing on the work was the only way Elena knew to keep the rest of it. The rushing, inconvenient, 4 years buried rest of it, safely behind the glass where it belonged. They were discussing fabric when Caroline went quiet for a moment. Elena continued writing. He never married her in his heart, you know, Caroline said. Her voice was careful, gentle even, like someone setting something down rather than throwing it. Elena did not look up from her notebook. Lady Cesile, she said, in the same tone she might have used to confirm a delivery date. Yes, a pause. He was kind to her. He was always kind. But it wasn't. Caroline stopped. I probably shouldn't say any of this. No, Elena agreed quietly. Probably not. Silence. Then Elena set her pen down and looked at Caroline Asheford directly. Not unkindly, but clearly. The ivory silk, she said, with the cream overlay. I think it will suit you better than the white. Shall I show you a sample? Caroline looked at her for a moment, searching, uncertain, and then nodded. Elena stood and went to the shelves and did not let her hands tremble, which took some effort, but not as much as she would have expected. She was, after all, 4 years of practice at this by now. Caroline left an hour later with a commission agreed and a follow-up appointment scheduled. Elena stood at the workroom window and watched her carriage pull away down the street. Dottie appeared silently at her elbow. Will you be all right? Dottie asked. Cut the new muslin, Elena said. We have the Harrington alteration due Thursday, and we're behind. Dottie looked at her for a moment. Right, she said, and went to cut the muslin. Elena stayed at the window another minute. Outside, the street was ordinary, a Tuesday afternoon in March, carts and pedestrians, and a thin gray sky threatening rain. She thought about what Caroline had said. She turned it over, examined it, set it down. Then she picked up her scissors and went back to work. She had not come this far by standing at windows. Lady Cesile Asheford did not die quickly. This was the thing that Elena learned later. Not from Caroline, not from anyone who knew her directly, but from the quiet, efficient way that bad news travels through the kind of social circles Elena now moved along the edges of. A client mentioning something in passing. A supplier's wife who read the society pages religiously and considered this a public service. Small pieces, arriving separately, assembling themselves into a picture Elena had not asked to see. Cesile had been ill for nearly 2 years before anyone outside the immediate family understood how serious it was. A lung condition, they said. Delicate from childhood. William had taken her to the country. To Asheford, then to a warmer property in the south, and had, by all accounts, been quietly and thoroughly devoted in the way that a decent man is devoted to someone he has promised to care for. Elena filed this information away in the same place. She filed everything she was not going to examine too closely. She had enough to occupy her. The spring was busy. 3 weddings among her clients, 2 of them large, one of them genuinely complicated by a mother of the bride who changed her mind about color 4 times and considered this Eleanor's problem to solve cheerfully. Eleanor solved it cheerfully. She also took on 2 new clients that season, both recommended by the Countess of Mere, both exactly the kind of steady, appreciative customer that kept a business breathing through the slower months. Caroline Ashford's gown was coming along beautifully. Eleanor had put particular care into it. Not because of who Caroline was, she told herself, but because it was a genuinely interesting construction, the ivory silk requiring a precision of cut that she found satisfying in the way that difficult things, done well, were always satisfying. She and Caroline had met 3 times for fittings by now, and Eleanor had found herself, despite every reasonable intention, genuinely liking her. Caroline was warm and direct and laughed easily, and she had the quality, rare enough that Eleanor noticed it, of being exactly the same person in every room she entered. She did not mention her brother again after that first visit. Eleanor was grateful for this in a way she did not examine. The news of Lady Cecile's death reached Eleanor on a Wednesday morning in October, 5 years after she had left Asheford Manor. She was at her cutting table when Dottie came in with the morning paper. Dottie had taken to doing this since Eleanor had mentioned once, casually, that she liked to know what was happening in the world. Dottie set it on the corner of the table without comment, which was how she always left it, and went back to her work. Eleanor finished the seam she was working on before she reached for it. The notice was small. Formal. Lady Cecile Ashford, beloved wife of William, Duke of Ashford, passed peacefully at Ashford Manor on the 14th of October. She is mourned by her husband and her family, 2 sentences. The kind of notice that communicated everything by saying almost nothing. Eleanor read it twice. Then she folded the paper and set it aside and went back to her cutting. She sat with it that evening, alone in her apartment with the lamp burning low. She sat with it honestly, the way she had sat with things on that first night in the coaching inn, named clearly, without softening. She felt grief, which surprised her, because she had never met Cecile and had spent considerable energy not thinking about her. But she understood, sitting quietly in her apartment, that what she grieved was not Cecile herself, but the life Cecile had lived. The 2 years of slow illness in a house full of careful kindness and no real warmth, the particular loneliness of being adequately loved by someone whose heart was already spoken for. That was a sad way to live. Eleanor thought Cecile deserved better than that, and was sorry she hadn't had it. She also thought briefly and without pride about the Dowager Duchess, about the word *kinder and the letter she had never been allowed to read. And then she set that thought aside too, because the timing of what she was feeling was terrible, and she knew it, and she was not going to be the kind of woman who couldn't tell the difference between grief and opportunity. She gave it 3 months, the minimum that decency required. She did not think about William Ashford during those 3 months any more than she had been thinking about him before, which was not nothing, but was manageable. She was very good at manageable. Caroline came for her final fitting in November. The gown was finished. Eleanor had known it was right the moment she held it up in the morning light. The ivory silk moving the way good silk moves, the overlay catching and releasing the light with every shift of the body, the whole thing constructed with the kind of invisible precision that looked effortless because of how much effort it had required. She was proud of it, quietly and without fuss. Caroline stood in front of the long mirror and was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Oh," very softly, and her eyes went bright. "It suits you," Eleanor said. which was an understatement, but Alina did not deal in excess. They spent an hour on small adjustments. A half-inch here, the buttons reconsidered and then confirmed. And Caroline talked about the wedding, about her fiancé, about the guest list and the flowers, and whether the chapel in the village was large enough for everyone her mother intended to invite. Alina listened and measured and made notes, and was genuinely happy for her, which felt clean and uncomplicated in a way that Alina appreciated. It was only as Caroline was putting her coat back on, nearly ready to leave, that she went quiet again. Alina recognized that particular quiet by now. "I want to tell you something," Caroline said. She was not looking in the mirror anymore. She was looking at Alina directly, with the careful expression of someone who has been debating this for a while and has finally decided. "And I want you to know that I'm not saying it to upset you or to interfere with anything. I'm saying it because I think you deserve to know." Alina set down her pincushion. She waited. "Our mother told William that you left willingly," Caroline said. "That morning. After she spoke to you," a pause. "She told him you'd said it yourself, that you had no interest in, that you understood the situation and had decided to go. She made it sound as though it was your choice entirely, as though you were simply being sensible and had moved on without a second thought." The workroom was very quiet. "He believed her," Caroline continued. "He had no reason not to. He thought you'd walked out because you'd made a rational decision and he wasn't worth the trouble." She looked at Alina steadily. "He thought that for 4 years, Alina. And I think it changed him, in ways that weren't good." Alina looked at the window. The November street outside was gray and cold, and entirely ordinary. "There's more," Caroline said. Her voice was gentler now. "When Cesile was dying the last weeks, when she knew, she asked to speak to William alone. I don't know everything she said. But William told me one thing afterward." She paused. "She told him to find you." Something moved through Alina's chest that she could not immediately name. "Cesile," she said. "She knew," Caroline said simply. She had known for a long time. William wasn't, he was never unkind to her. He never said or did anything improper, but she knew. She was cleverer than most people gave her credit for. Caroline's voice was soft. "She told him she'd spent 2 years being grateful to you, and that she wanted him to stop wasting time." Alina was very still. "I think," Caroline said carefully, "that he has been trying to work out how to find you. I think he's been trying for 2 months. I think he keeps not doing it because he spent 4 years believing you walked away without looking back, and he's not sure." She stopped. "I probably shouldn't say any more." "No," Alina said. Her voice was steady. "It required more effort than usual." "Probably not." Caroline picked up her gloves. She put them on slowly, giving Alina time for whatever she needed time for. At the door she stopped and looked back. "The gown is extraordinary," she said. "Thank you, Alina." Alina nodded. She waited until the bell above the door had rung, and the sound of Caroline's footsteps had faded down the street. Then she sat down on the small wooden chair by the window, the one the client sat in during fittings, and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed. She thought about a letter she had never been allowed to read. She thought about a man who had believed, for 4 years, that she had left willingly. She thought about a woman she had never met, lying in a room at Asheford Manor in the last weeks of her life, spending some of her remaining breath on a stranger's behalf. She wanted him to stop wasting time. Alina sat there for a long while. Outside, the November light faded slowly into early dark, and the street lamps came on one by one, and somewhere below in the building Dottie was moving around, tidying up, getting ready to leave. Finally Dottie appeared in the doorway, coat on, hat in hand. She looked at Alina sitting in the client's chair in the half-dark. She said nothing. "Good night, Dottie," Alina said. "Good night, Miss Voss," Dottie said. The door closed. Alina sat alone in the quiet workroom with the lamp burning low and the ivory silk of Caroline's finished gown catching the light gently from the dress form in the corner. And she allowed herself, for the first time in a very long time, to think about William Ashford without immediately putting the thought somewhere else. It was an uncomfortable experience. It was also, she admitted to the empty room, not entirely unwelcome. She did not sleep well that night. She was not accustomed to not sleeping well. She had trained herself out of it, years ago, on the grounds that tiredness made everything harder and she could not afford harder. But that night she lay in the dark, and the things Caroline had said moved through her in a way she could not organize or file or set neatly aside. He believed her. 4 years of believing Alina had simply walked away. 4 years of thinking she had looked at the situation, made a rational calculation, and decided he wasn't worth the trouble. She thought about what that would have done to a person. What quiet, persistent damage that kind of story would work on someone who had already been willing to watch from a window rather than go after what he wanted. And then she thought about the Dowager Duchess, and the word asterisk kinder, and the message she had delivered so smoothly, so efficiently, so utterly without conscience. And she felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained elements of both. She had spent 4 years building something real and solid and hers, and she was glad of it. Genuinely, completely glad. But she had also spent 4 years not knowing that the story she had been told was not the true one. She had spent 4 years believing William Ashford had sent his mother to do the work he didn't want to do himself. She had carried that. She had built her whole careful, forward-moving life on the foundation of that particular understanding. And it was not true. She was not sure, lying in the dark, what to do with that. 3 weeks passed. Alina worked. She finished 2 commissions, started 3 more, hired a 3rd seamstress because the spring bookings were already filling in ways that made Dottie look quietly pleased with herself. She had tea with Mrs. Fenn, who was getting older now but still sharp, and who looked at Alina over the rim of her cup, with the particular expression she used when she knew something was different and was waiting to be told. Alina did not tell her. She was waiting, she realized. Not passively. Alina did not do anything passively, but waiting in the way that a person waits when they are not sure what the next step should be, and they need to be sure before they take it. She had spent 4 years moving forward without hesitation. This felt different. This required more care. She was still deliberating, on a Tuesday afternoon in the last week of November, when the bell above the workroom door rang and Dottie went out front and came back wearing the careful, neutral expression that Alina now recognized immediately. "A caller, Miss Voss," Dottie said. Alina looked up from her work. "He didn't give his name," Dottie said. "But he said to tell you," she paused, and something almost imperceptible moved across her face. "He said to tell you he's very bad at letters." The scissors stayed in Alina's hand. She thought about a library. She thought about tell me something true. She thought about a window and rain and 3 miles of dark road, and a man who had stood watching until the dark took her, and had believed for 4 years that she hadn't looked back because she hadn't wanted to. She set the scissors down. She straightened her spine. She walked out to the front room. He looked different. That was Alina's first thought, and she recognized immediately that it was not a useful thought, so she set it aside and looked at him plainly, the way she looked at everything. Clearly, without embellishment. He was older, which was only reasonable since they both were. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in his bearing that was quieter than she remembered. Less the ease of a man who has never had to wonder whether he is welcome, more the careful stillness of someone who has learned that certainty is not guaranteed. He was wearing a coat that was good but not showy, and he was holding his hat in his hands, which struck her as significant in a way she couldn't immediately articulate. Dukes, in her experience, did not stand in doorways holding their hats. He looked at her, and something moved across his face that he didn't try to hide, which surprised her. She had expected composure. She had expected the particular armored politeness of someone who had rehearsed this. Instead, he simply looked at her the way a person looks when they have been waiting for something for a very long time and are not entirely sure, now that the moment has arrived, that they are equal to it. "Miss Voss," he said. "Your Grace," she said. A silence that was not quite comfortable and not quite unbearable settled between them. Somewhere in the back of the workroom, a pair of scissors that had been cutting fabric had very quietly stopped cutting. Dottie, Eleanor noted, was not subtle. "I don't have an appointment," William said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "You don't." "I should have made one," he paused. "I almost did." Several times, he looked at her steadily. "I kept not doing it." "I know," Eleanor said. And then, because she believed in saying true things clearly, "Your sister told me." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more the look of a man who has just understood that the conversation he prepared for is not the conversation he is going to have. "Ah," he said. "Yes," said Eleanor. Another silence. Outside, a cart went by on the street, loud and ordinary, and then it was quiet again. "May I come in?" William asked. "Properly." Not. He glanced around the front room, at the fabric samples on the table and the order book open on the counter. "Not here if that's I only meant." "There's a sitting room at the back," Eleanor said. "It's where I meet with clients." She watched him absorb the word asterisk clients. She watched him decide not to say anything about it. She was, despite everything, a little impressed. "Thank you," he said. The sitting room at the back of the workroom was small and simply furnished. 2 good chairs, a low table, the kind of tasteful arrangement that put clients at ease without distracting them from the business at hand. Eleanor had chosen everything in it herself, which meant it was functional and uncluttered, and had exactly one personal object in it. A small framed sketch of the Shropshire countryside that her father had drawn for her when she left home, which hung on the wall beside the window and which she had looked at every day for 4 years. William sat in one of the chairs. Eleanor sat in the other. She did not offer tea, because this was not that kind of conversation, and they both knew it. He looked at the sketch on the wall for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," Eleanor said. "We were not promised to each other. You had obligations I was fully aware of. You discharged them." She kept her voice even. Not cold, she was not going for cold, simply accurate. "There is nothing to explain." "There is," he said. "Because what you were told, what my mother told you that night, was not entirely true." Eleanor looked at him. "She told you I had asked her to send you away," he said. His voice was quiet and without defense. "She told you I didn't want to say it myself. That I thought it would be kinder." He paused. "I didn't say that. I didn't know she was going to speak to you at all. I came home from Hargrove's estate that afternoon We had been discussing the settlement terms, and I intended to, he stopped. Began again. I intended to tell you myself. About Cecile. About the engagement. I thought you deserved to hear it honestly from me, and I had been, another pause. I had been putting it off, which was cowardly, and I knew it was cowardly, and I had run out of time. Eleanor was very still. When I came to find you, William continued, Mrs. Hartley told me you had already gone. That you had packed your things and left that evening. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. My mother told me you'd said it yourself, that you understood the situation and had decided to leave. That you were being sensible. He said the word with a careful neutrality that didn't quite conceal what was underneath it. She said you hadn't wanted a conversation about it. The room was very quiet. I believed her, he said. I had no reason not to. And I thought perhaps you were right. That you had seen the situation more clearly than I had and made the rational choice. He looked at her steadily. I told myself that for quite a long time. How long? Eleanor asked. Longer than was reasonable, he said. Considerably longer than was reasonable. Eleanor looked at the sketch on the wall. The Shropshire hills, rendered in her father's careful pencil strokes, patient and familiar. She had looked at it every day for 4 years and thought of home, and occasionally, in the evenings when she was tired, of other things. She told me, Eleanor said, that you had asked her to do it. That you didn't want the conversation in person. She paused. She said you thought it would be kinder. I know, William said. Caroline told me. Last month. His voice was level, but something beneath it was not. When I found out what she had said to you, what she had said to both of us, I went to speak to her. And she said she had done what was necessary. He was quiet for a moment. She said she would do it again. Eleanor considered this. She considered the Dowager Duchess. Her precise efficiency, her perfect politeness, the way she had delivered her small, careful cruelties with the confidence of someone who believed absolutely in the righteousness of what she was doing. She thought about what it meant to be that certain. She thought about whether it was possible to be that certain, and also entirely wrong. She loves you, Eleanor said. It was not an excuse. It was simply true. William looked at her. Yes, he said. In the way that people love things they consider their own. They sat in silence for a moment that was different from the silences before it, less guarded, more complicated. Then William said, You walked 3 miles in the rain. Eleanor looked at him. I watched you, he said. From the library window. I watched until I couldn't see you anymore. He paused. I have thought about that a great deal in 4 years. About what it means, what it says about a person that they can walk away like that. Without stopping. Without looking back. It says, Eleanor said carefully, that they have somewhere to go. Did you? That night. She thought about the coaching inn. The damp room. The 4 shillings and 3pence. Not exactly, she said. But I was going to. Something moved across his face that might, in better light, have been the beginning of a smile. I don't doubt it, he said. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. The same thing that had shifted 4 years ago in the library, which she had pushed down then with considerably more success than she was managing now. She recognized it this time for what it was. She had always known what it was. She had simply been, for 4 years, in no position to do anything about it. She was not entirely sure she was in a position now either. Your Grace, she said. William, he said quietly. And then after a pause, still. If you'll allow it. She looked at him for a long moment. He sat there and let her look, which took a particular kind of steadiness she found she respected. "What is it you want?" she asked. Plainly. Directly. The way she had learned to ask everything. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasively. She could see him choosing words with the care of someone who has rehearsed things, and then, in the moment, decided the rehearsed version is wrong. "I want," he said finally, "to begin correctly. Whatever that looks like from here." He looked at her steadily. "I want to do the thing I didn't do 4 years ago, which is to be honest with you in the right order, at the right time, without a window between us." A pause. "I am aware that I am extremely late." "You are," Elena agreed. "I know," he said. "I know I am. And I know I have no right to ask you to." He stopped. Began again. "I'm not asking you for anything today. I only came to say what should have been said." And to another pause, briefer this time, "to see whether you were well." "I am well," Elena said. "I can see that," he said. And the way he said it told her that he had seen it, genuinely. The workroom, the sign above the door, the thing she had built from nothing in 4 years, and that it meant something to him which she had not expected. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "You're bad for business, Your Grace." He stilled. "You have been standing in my front room," she continued, "without an appointment in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon in a street where people notice things." She held his gaze. "By tomorrow morning, it will be discussed at length in 3 separate households." He absorbed this. "I apologize," he said. "I didn't think." "No," she said. "You didn't." And then, before she could stop herself, "Come back on Thursday." The words were out before she had fully decided to say them. She noted this with the detached interest of someone observing their own behavior from a slight distance. William looked at her, as though he wasn't certain he had heard correctly. "Thursday," she said again firmly. "Committed now. At 2 o'clock. That is when I take my afternoon break. We can walk if the weather allows. It is less conspicuous than this." A silence. Then he said, "Thursday at 2 o'clock. "Yes," said Elena. He stood. He picked up his hat. He had set it on the low table, she noticed, at some point during the conversation. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has more to say and has decided, wisely, that this is not the moment. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," Elena said. "I haven't decided anything." "I know," he said. "Neither have I. But I think," he paused at the door, "I think Thursday is a start." "It's an appointment," Elena said. "Don't mistake it for more than that." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. But close. Exactly the same as she remembered. He came back on Thursday. He came back the Thursday after that, and the one after that. And by the 4th Thursday, Elena had stopped pretending to herself that she was still deciding anything, though she continued to give no outward indication of this because she was Elena Voss, and she had not spent 4 years building something solid out of nothing to become careless now. They walked when the weather allowed. Along the better streets near the workroom, a perfectly respectable distance between them, the kind of walks that could be explained as professional acquaintance if anyone asked, though no one did. When the weather did not allow, they sat in the small back room with tea that Elena had begun providing, because it was November and the pretense of formality had its limits. He told her things. She told him things. They were careful with each other in the way that people are careful when they know that what they are handling is breakable and worth the care. He told her about the years of the marriage, honestly, without self-pity, without asking for absolution. He told her about Cecile's illness, about the last months, about the conversation at the end. He told her what Cecile had whispered, and Elinor sat with it quietly and felt, again, that complicated grief for a woman she had never met who had spent her last breath on someone else's behalf. Elinor told him about London, about Mrs. Fenn and Dotty, and the bolt of wool in Cheapside, and the first winter, and the Countess of Mere, and the three Duchesses, and the sign she had painted herself with steadier hands the second time. She told him all of it without softening it, and he listened without interrupting and asked questions that were real questions, the way he always had, the way she had noticed from the very beginning. He did not tell her what he felt. Not directly, not yet. But it was present in every conversation the way weather is present before it arrives, felt before it is named, certain before it is confirmed. She did not tell him either. She was not ready. Or rather, she was ready, and she knew she was ready, and she was taking her time about it on principle, because she had walked 3 miles in the rain for this man's family, and she thought a reasonable period of deliberation was not too much to ask. The Dowager Duchess arrived at the workroom on a Wednesday. Elinor looked up from her cutting table, and there she was. Margaret Pemberton, Dowager Duchess of Asheford, standing in the front room in a coat that had cost more than Elinor's first month's rent, looking around the workroom with the careful eyes of a woman who misses nothing, and is not bothering to hide the fact that she is assessing everything she sees. She was older, smaller than Elinor remembered, which surprised her, though she understood immediately that this was an optical illusion created by memory. The woman had not shrunk, Elinor had simply grown. Dotty was standing very still near the shelves, with the expression of someone prepared to intervene, if necessary, and uncertain what that would look like. "Miss Voss," the Dowager Duchess said. "Your Grace," Elinor said. She set down her scissors. She did not move from behind the cutting table, which put a solid piece of furniture between them, which was not an accident. The Dowager Duchess looked at her. Elinor looked back. "I understand my son has been calling on you," she said. "He has," Elinor said. "On Thursdays. By appointment." A pause. "I see." The Dowager Duchess moved slightly, not quite a step forward, more the adjustment of someone deciding where to stand for an important conversation. "I want to be direct with you, Miss Voss. As I was before." "You were direct with me before," Elinor said pleasantly. "You told me your son had asked you to send me away." That was not entirely direct. The room went very still. Something moved across the Dowager Duchess's face. Not shame, Elinor thought, not quite, something more complicated than that. The expression of a person who has always believed that the ends justify the method, confronting the possibility that other people are not obliged to agree. "I did what was necessary," she said. Her voice was steady. "I stand by that." "I know you do," Elinor said. "I'm not asking you not to." She looked at the older woman clearly, without anger and without warmth. "You protected what you valued. I understand that. I have spent 4 years learning to do the same." She paused. "What I will not do, not again, is pretend that what happened was something other than what it was. You lied to me, and you lied to your son, and the consequences of that are something we are all still navigating." Silence. "He is a duke," the Dowager Duchess said. "You are." "I am a woman who built something from nothing," Elinor said. Quietly, without heat. Without help, without connections, without anyone opening doors for me. "I am someone your son, 3 closest friends' wives trust entirely." I am someone who walked 3 miles in the rain and arrived somewhere worth arriving. She held the older woman's gaze. I am not the same person you sent away. And I would ask you to look again before you finish that sentence. A very long silence. The Dowager Duchess looked at her. Elinor did not look away. Then the older woman looked around the workroom again, slowly this time, differently than before. At the seamstresses bent over their work. At the order books on the counter. At the sign above the door, visible through the window. At Elinor herself, standing behind her cutting table with her hands steady and her spine straight, and absolutely no inclination to beg for anything. William will do as he chooses, the Dowager Duchess said finally. Her voice had changed slightly. Not softened, that was too strong a word. But shifted, the way a position shifts when the person holding it has encountered something they were not entirely prepared for. He always has. Yes, Elinor said. I know. A pause. The Marchioness of Everleigh, the Dowager Duchess said, is looking for someone to make her daughter's court presentation gown. I told her I would pass along a recommendation. She looked at Elinor with eyes that were not warm and not unkind and were, Elinor thought, doing some kind of work that she hadn't decided to name yet. If you are interested. Elinor held her gaze for a moment. I would need the measurements by the end of the month, she said. And a confirmed date. I don't hold commissions on speculation. The Dowager Duchess nodded once. Precisely. The way she had nodded in that sitting room 5 years ago, when she thought something had been agreed. This time, Elinor thought, something actually had. She told William about the visit on Thursday. He went very still, and then he exhaled, and then he said something under his breath that was not quite a word and entirely an opinion. She sent you a client, Elinor said. Did she? He said. Not a question. She did, Elinor looked at him. I think that may be the closest she is capable of getting to an apology. William was quiet for a moment. Probably, he said. Yes, he looked at Elinor. How do you feel about that? Elinor considered. Outside, the December street was cold and bright, their breath visible in the air, the walk today brisker than usual because it was that kind of day. I feel, she said carefully, that it is enough. For now, she paused. I'm not in the business of requiring people to be more than they are. Only of requiring them to be honest about what that is. William looked at her for a long moment. They had stopped walking, she noticed. They were standing on the pavement in the December cold, and neither of them had acknowledged stopping. Elinor, he said. And that was all he said, just her name, but the way he said it. Quietly, as though it were something that had been his for a long time, and he was finally saying so, made the 4 years fold up somehow cleanly, like something that had happened, and was now simply the distance between then and here. She looked up at him. Don't say anything you'll need to take back, she said. But her voice was not as steady as she intended. I'm not going to take it back, he said. I have had 4 years to consider it, and I am not going to take it back. He looked at her with the careful, open expression she had first seen in the library. The one that had no armor in it. I am in love with you. I have been in love with you since a Wednesday afternoon in a library when you told me about 3 broken chandelier crystals and looked at me as though you were not remotely impressed by anything I was. He paused. I should have said so then. I didn't. I'm saying it now. Elinor looked at him. The December wind moved between them, cold and indifferent and present in the way that weather is present. The world continuing its business around the edges of something that had nothing to do with weather. "You are extremely late," she said. "I know," he said. "I know I am." "William," she said. And she said his name the way she had wanted to say it, 4 years ago, in the library. The way she had not let herself say it then because she had been sensible and careful, and the glass had still been thick enough. She said it as though it belonged in her mouth, which it did, which it always had. He looked at her, waiting, still holding everything back by some effort of will she could see clearly and found, despite herself, deeply endearing. "Thursday is not enough," she said. "I need more than Thursdays." The thing that had been almost a smile arrived, finally, completely. "Then you shall have them," he said. "All of them if you want." Elinor looked at him for another moment. At this man who had watched from a window and believed the wrong story for 4 years and come back anyway, hat in hand, bad at letters, asking for nothing, offering everything, and she thought about the 3 miles, and the rain, and the coaching in, and Clerkenwell, and the bolt of wool and Dotty, and the sign she had painted twice, and her father's handwriting at the top of a blank page. What comes next? "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said. "I have kept every promise I have made in my life," William said quietly. "I simply haven't made enough of them." Elinor looked at the December sky. Then she looked at him. "Walk me back," she said. "I have work to finish." He offered his arm. She took it. They walked back through the cold, bright street. Not rushed, not slow. The right pace for 2 people who have figured out the direction and are no longer in any particular hurry to prove it. And Elinor kept her hand on his arm and did not think about the 3 miles. She thought about Thursday. She thought about what came next. It was, she decided, a very good start. 1 year later, Elinor woke early as she always did. This had not changed. She suspected it would never change. She was constitutionally incapable of lying in bed past 6 o'clock, had been since childhood, and marriage, it turned out, had not altered this any more than it had altered any of the other things that were simply and essentially her. William had accepted this with the good grace of a man who had decided, thoroughly and without reservation, that everything about her was something he wanted, including the parts that meant he sometimes woke at 6:30 to find her side of the bed already cool, and her voice coming faintly from the next room where she kept her notebooks. She was standing at the window when he found her. It was the window she had chosen herself. That had been one of her conditions, stated plainly and without apology in the early weeks when they were still navigating what it meant to fold 2 very established lives into one. She had wanted a room that was hers. Not a sitting room allotted to her by tradition, not a dressing room or a morning room or any of the other rooms that great houses assign to women, as though personal space were a courtesy, extended rather than a right assumed. She had wanted a room with a good window and enough light, and a table large enough for her notebooks and her work, and William had shown her 4 different rooms and stood back and waited while she looked at each one, and she had chosen this one because of the window. It looked south. In winter, the light came in low and golden in the mornings. In summer, it was bright until mid-afternoon. It looked out over the garden and beyond the garden to the long slope of the grounds, and, on clear days, to the line of trees at the edge of the estate that marked where Asheford ended and the rest of the world began. She had stood at this window every morning for 8 months, and she had not yet tired of it. William came in quietly. He had learned, in 8 months, the particular quality of her early morning silences. Which ones wanted company and which ones wanted to be left alone, and he had become, without making anything of it, very good at reading the difference. This one, he could tell from the doorway, was the kind that wanted company but hadn't asked for it yet. He crossed the room and stood beside her. He did not say anything immediately. He looked out at what she was looking at. The garden in the early November light, the frost still on the grass, the sky the pale, clear blue of a cold morning that intended to be a good day. "You're thinking," he said finally. "I'm always thinking," she said. "You're thinking about something specific," he said. "You have the look." "I have a look." "You have several," he said. "This is the one where something is being organized." He glanced at her. "What is it?" Elinor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was thinking about the drive." He looked out at the window, following her eyeline. From here, the front drive of Asheford Manor was not visible. It was on the other side of the house entirely. But she didn't mean the drive as it was now. He understood that. "The night you left," he said. "Yes." He was quiet. He had learned to be quiet when she was working through something, which was not always easy for him, but which he managed because he understood that Elinor's thoughts needed room to arrive at their own conclusions, and arrived better without assistance. "I've been trying to remember," she said, "exactly what I thought about. Walking. I was very deliberate about it at the time. I remember making myself focus on something practical. I counted steps for a while. I thought about the coaching in and whether there would be a room." She paused. "But there was a part of the walk somewhere around the 2nd mile, I think, when I was too wet and too cold for practicalities, where I just walked." Without thinking about anything specific, she looked out at the frost on the grass. "I've been trying to remember what that felt like." "And do you remember?" "No," she said. "Not exactly." A pause. "I remember that I didn't look back. I remember deciding not to. But I can't remember what it felt like to be in that moment, walking away from here." She was quiet. William waited. "I think," Elinor said, "that I couldn't afford to feel it properly at the time. I think I stored it somewhere and kept moving." She turned and looked at him, directly, clearly, the way she looked at everything. "I think I've been unpacking it in small amounts ever since, and I'm nearly done." William looked at her. "Nearly," he said. "Nearly," she confirmed. "I'll let you know when I'm finished." He held her gaze for a moment. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I know," she said. "That's partly why I'm nearly done." Breakfast at Asheford Manor was a negotiated arrangement. William had grown up with the full formal production. Sideboard loaded from 7, everyone expected to appear dressed and ready for the day. Conversation conducted at a volume appropriate to the size of the room, which was a very large room. Elinor had grown up with her father eating toast over a book at a small kitchen table, an occasional comfortable silence. They had arrived, after some discussion and one genuinely funny disagreement that neither of them had expected to find funny in the moment, at a compromise. A small table in the morning room, 2 places only, food brought rather than displayed, conversation optional. Mrs. Hartley, who had navigated the new Duchess's arrival with impressive adaptability, considering, had adjusted without complaint, which Elinor respected. Caroline was visiting this week, which meant breakfast was louder than usual. She arrived at the table already talking. Something about the new curate in the village, and whether his horse was actually lame or whether this was a strategy to be driven places, and kissed Elinor on the cheek, and helped herself to toast and continued talking without any of this interrupting anything, which was entirely characteristic. Elinor watched her with the particular fondness she had arrived at for Caroline, genuine, uncomplicated, the kind that had developed so naturally she had barely noticed it forming. Caroline had a quality that Elinor had come to value enormously. She was exactly the same in every room. She had been the same in the workroom on Marylebone, nervous and trying not to show it, as she was here at her brother's breakfast table. There was no gap between the public and private versions of her. Alina, who had spent years learning to read the gaps in people, found this restful in a way she couldn't entirely explain. "You're not listening," Caroline said cheerfully, to no one in particular. "I heard the curate," William said. "And the horse." "And," Caroline said. "And I have no opinion about either." Caroline looked at Alina. "He's been like this all morning," Alina said, with the tone of someone who is entirely used to it and not remotely bothered. "I have been perfectly communicative," William said. "You said good morning, and then you looked at the window for 4 minutes," Alina said. "I was thinking." "So was I. I did it more efficiently." Caroline looked between them with the expression she always wore during these exchanges. A slightly wondering delight, like someone watching a species of animal they had heard about but never expected to see in person. She had told Alina privately, 3 months after the wedding, that she had never heard William argue about anything before. He had always simply agreed, or gone quiet or deferred. She found it, she said, enormously reassuring. "He's himself again," was what she had actually said. "He's been himself again since you came back. I didn't realize how much he wasn't before." Alina had not known what to do with this, so she had thanked her and changed the subject, and later that evening she had sat with it quietly in her room with the good window and allowed it to matter as much as it did. The letter arrived after breakfast. Alina recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately. She had seen it once before, on a letter of recommendation written in a careful, hopeful hand. Her father's writing. She picked it up and turned it over, and the familiar sight of it did something small and warm in her chest that it always did still, even now. Her father had visited twice since the wedding. The first time he had been so overwhelmed by Asheford Manor that he had spent the first evening very quietly looking at things and saying very little, which was unlike him. By the second day he had recovered himself, and by the third day he was in William's library reading happily and had opinions about the cataloging system that William genuinely wanted to hear, and Alina had stood in the doorway watching them talk and felt something so complete and uncomplicated that she hadn't had a word for it at the time. She had the word now. It was settled. She felt settled. She opened the letter. Her father was well. The new curate. Apparently the lame horse was a universal topic in the county, was adequate, but no one would be mistaking him for Reverend Alsop, who had retired last spring. He had been to see the Hendersons, who sent their regards. He was enclosing a sketch he had done of the view from the vicarage window, which he thought she might like for her room. She unfolded the sketch. The Shropshire hills. His careful pencil, patient and exact, the same hills he had drawn for her when she left home the first time. She sat with it for a moment. Then she went to her room and took down the framed one. The one she had looked at every day for 4 years in the workroom on Marylebone, and set it gently aside, and hung the new one in its place. Then she stood back and looked at it. Different hills. Same hand. Everything that mattered still there, and everything else updated. That seemed, she thought, about right. She went riding in the afternoon. This was new. Alina had not ridden regularly since childhood. It was not the kind of thing her life in London had accommodated, and she had arrived at Asheford with a competence that was technically sound and stylistically cautious. William had said nothing about this, which she appreciated. He had simply, over the course of several months, found reasons to ride with her, and gradually her caution had loosened and her confidence had come back. And now she went out on her own on clear afternoons when the work was done and came back with cold cheeks and a clarity of mind that she had previously only achieved through a very long walk. She rode south today, along the edge of the estate, the ground still hard with frost, the mare's breath coming in steady plumes. The day had stayed clear, the sky a deep November blue, and the light was going gold at the edges by the time she turned back toward the house. She came around the west side of the estate, and the front of Asheford Manor came into view, the long facade, the gravel drive, the windows catching the late afternoon light. She had ridden this way before, but something made her slow today, then stop entirely, sitting quietly on the mare at the edge of the drive. She looked at the house. She thought about the night she had walked away from it, the rain, the dark, the gravel, her boots letting in the water. She tried again to find the feeling from the second mile, the part before she had started counting. She thought she almost had it now. Something that was not quite grief and not quite determination, but contained both. The feeling of someone who has made a decision that costs them something real and is paying the cost without stopping. She had paid it. She had paid it and kept walking and arrived somewhere worth arriving at, and then arrived here, which she had not expected and which was. She looked at the house in the afternoon light, at the window on the second floor that she now knew was the library, which was more than she had planned for. She heard hoofbeats behind her and did not need to turn to know who it was. William drew up beside her and looked at what she was looking at. "Are you thinking about leaving again?" he said. It was the same question she had once imagined someone asking. The question she had turned over in her mind on various evenings when she was imagining what it would look like to be here, which she had done more often, she could admit now, than she had let herself acknowledge. "No," she said. "I'm thinking about how far 3 miles actually is." He was quiet for a moment. "Far enough," he said. "Yes," she said. "But not too far." She looked at the house. "That's the part I got wrong when I was walking it. I thought it was the kind of distance that meant something permanent. That once you'd walked that far from somewhere, the door was closed. And now..." She considered. The mare shifted beneath her, patient and warm. The light was going fast now, the way it did in November, one moment gold, the next already fading toward blue. "Now I think," she said, "that distance is just distance. It's what you do at the end of it that determines what it means." William looked at her. She could feel him looking, the particular quality of his attention that she had catalogued now in all its variations and still found, 8 months in, entirely worth having. "What you did at the end of it," he said, "was build something remarkable." "Yes," Elinor said. She did not deflect this. She had learned, slowly and with some effort, not to deflect things that were true. "I did. And then you let me in," he said. Which I think was the more difficult part. Elinor considered this honestly. "Comparable," she said. "For different reasons." He made a sound that was the laugh he made when something struck him as both funny and true, which was one of her preferred versions of it. Then he said, "Come inside. It's getting cold." "In a moment," she said. He waited. He was good at waiting now. She thought he had always had the capacity for it, had simply, for a long time, been waiting for the wrong things or waiting in the wrong direction. He had gotten better at knowing where to look. So had she. She looked at the window on the second floor. She thought about him standing there, the night she left, one hand pressed against the cold glass, watching until the dark took her. She had not known he was watching. She had made herself not look back, and so she had not seen it, and for 4 years she had believed he had walked away from the window long before she was out of sight. He hadn't. She knew that now. He had stood there until there was nothing left to see. She thought about all the things they had each carried, alone, through 4 years that hadn't needed to be as long as they were. She thought about the Dowager Duchess, who had sent her the Marchioness's daughter as a client and had said, at the wedding, "You may call me Margaret Asterisk," in a tone that communicated a great deal about how much that had cost her, and expected to be credited accordingly. She thought about Cesile, patient, clear-eyed Cesile, who had known everything and asked for nothing except that the time not be wasted further. She thought about Dottie, who was running the workroom now with a third seamstress and a fourth in negotiation, and a sign that still said E. Voss because Eleanor had suggested changing it, and Dottie had looked at her with an expression that closed the subject entirely. She thought about her father's sketch on the wall. The same hills, the same hand. Everything that mattered still there. She looked at the house one more time. At all its windows lit against the coming dark, at the gravel drive she had walked down in the rain, at the library window on the second floor, and she felt, quietly and completely, the last of it settle. The 3 miles. The coaching in. The 4 shillings and threepence. Clerkenwell. The bolt of wool. The sign painted twice. The Thursdays. All of it. The full distance from that night to this one, laid out behind her like a road she had walked in one direction, and could now simply see, clearly and without flinching, from the other end. It was, she thought, a very long way. It was also, she thought, exactly the right length. She turned the mare toward the house. "All right," she said to William, who had been waiting. "Let's go in." They rode up the drive together in the last of the afternoon light, unhurried, side by side, the house growing larger ahead of them with every step, and Eleanor did not look back. She had somewhere to go. Thank you for staying until the end. Write the city you're watching from in the comments. I read them all. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.